Deleted Peppa Pig episode. The Mystery of the Chest. On a bright, sunny day, the entire Peppa family was on their way to visit Grandma and Grandpa.
I can't wait to see Grandma and Grandpa,
said Peppa.
Dinosaur. Grrr.
Exclaimed George. They enjoyed a cozy time together, baking cookies. Peppa and George exchanged mischievous smiles.
Let's explore the basement,
suggested Peppa. They tiptoed down the creaky stairs into the dimly lit basement. In the corner stood a dusty chest covered in cobwebs.
What is that? A treasure chest?
Peppa asked in surprise. She opened it with a loud creak. Suddenly, dark shadows burst out from inside, forming sinister figures. Peppa, I'm scared, George said fearfully. The children's screams caused their parents to rush downstairs quickly.
What's going on, kids?
Asked Mummy Pig. The shadows swirled around the parents, trying to pull them into the chest. Daddy Pig grabbed one of the tentacles that was emerging from the chest.
George, Peppa, back away!
Daddy Pig shouted sternly. But suddenly, one of the shadows struck him, causing him to lose his balance and loosen his grip. The shadows swallowed the parents. Grandpa Pig hurried down the stairs with a serious look on his face.
Inside this chest were the souls of those brave enough to open it. I found this on an old ship,
he said grimly.
It's a curse.
He pulled out an old book from his pocket and began to recite a spell. The shadows taunted Grandpa, whispering incomprehensible words, and he looked frightened.
Grandpa, help us!
Peppa cried out. The shadows started to dissolve, but suddenly George snatched the book from Grandpa's hands and threw it onto the floor. His eyes turned red as if he were under hypnosis. No more light needed, he declared. The remaining shadows lunged at Grandpa, dragging him into the chest. He struggled but was helpless. Peppa watched in horror as George advanced toward her with tears in her eyes.
What are you doing?
She shouted in fear. With tears streaming down her face, she grabbed the tattered book tightly and held it high.
I won't let you take my family,
she declared to the shadows, her voice trembling but resolute. She recited something she remembered from Grandpa's stories. The shadows screamed and began to vanish. Silence fell over the basement. Peppa and George were left alone, trembling with horror as they realized they had lost their family. Grandma Pig appeared at the top of the stairs, looking horrified at what was happening. Peppa and George looked at each other, trembling, speechless. From inside the open chest, faint whispers of the shadows still echoed softly. In the evening, Peppa went home, but the road veered off to the side. She saw familiar faces, Susie, Rebecca, Denny, and new ones, pale and motionless. In the center of the circle, a puddle of black liquid reflecting the sky, but distorted. They stood silently, waiting. Peppa slowly approached. Susie turned her head abruptly without blinking, her eyes empty sockets, a black drop at the corner of her mouth. All the children simultaneously turned their heads toward Peppa, synchronously, faces devoid of emotion. The puddle in the center of the circle pulsed, gentle ripples emanating from it. Peppa stepped back. The children reached their hands out at the same time, their fingers elongated, black liquid flowing from them. The children's mouths opened to an unnatural width, but silently. The puddle in the center suddenly stretched upward, forming a black tentacle reaching toward Peppa. Peppa ran. When she looked back, everything had disappeared. But it was worse. Numerous trails of black slime led in different directions. Some led to Peppa's gate. Someone left with her, or followed her. Midnight. Peppa sat on her bed, drawing a circle in her notebook. A shadow near the door began to change. It was the silhouette of one of the children from the circle. Beyond the door, the park. That very park. Children in a circle. She was among them, standing hand in hand with the others. If Peppa isn't with them, then who is in the circle? Her eyes became as empty as Susie's. She slowly smiled. Suddenly, a face, blurred, eye sockets empty, mouth twisted into a grin, black liquid dripping, darkness flooding everything. You are already standing in the circle. You just don't know it yet. Deleted episode of Peppa Pig, Zombie Apocalypse. It all started as an ordinary morning. Peppa was playing carefree with George in the room when suddenly the sky outside darkened and the sun turned a toxic green.
What's happening, George?
Suddenly, a loud noise sounded from outside. George whispered, "Peppa, I'm scared." Peppa and George carefully descended the stairs. They saw their parents, wounded and bitten, with dark green skin and spots all over their faces. They were surrounded by zombies. Mummy Pig weakly muttered.
Help! We couldn't escape.
Daddy Pig shouted with his last strength.
Run quickly!
The house filled with zombie pigs. It seemed there was no way out. Peppa remembered that there was a basement in the house. She quickly grabbed Evie, took George's hand, and they locked themselves inside, trying to catch their breath and calm down. The basement was dark and frightening. They pushed through cobwebs. From above, they could hear crashes and screams. They stayed there for several hours, passing the time by rummaging through old things out of boredom. Suddenly, George found a cassette labeled, "The Time Has Come." They found an old player and turned it on. They heard their grandfather's voice.
My little pigs, if you're listening to this recording, it means they've found you. The fate of our city is in your hands. In the basement was a secret laboratory. Press 3 palms against the wall. A control panel will open. The entry code is 7221. In my lab notebook, find recipe number 666. Only it can cure all those infected.
Peppa exclaimed.
That's the recipe. We need to mix these ingredients.
They set to work, and even the process seemed fun to them. After several hours, the potion was ready. Peppa poured the vaccine into bottles and distributed it to all the infected. Gradually, everyone began to revive. The spots disappeared, and their skin color returned to normal. The city thanked its saviors. The Peppa family decided to celebrate this day. They sat in the kitchen with a cake and tea, but suddenly a familiar roar was heard. Peppa and George were playing hide and seek. Just like always, George chose a cozy spot, a little further than usual. Peppa was walking through an empty hall. The house seemed frozen in time. George was hiding well, too well. Mommy Pig was washing the dishes, but her movements were a bit slowed down.
Mommy, George isn't coming out.
He always plays like that.
Peppa felt the presence of something supernatural. The wardrobe where George was hiding was now closer than before. George was always nearby, but he wasn't here. The game of hide and seek had long since crossed into another realm. Peppa approached the window. There was George. He was outside, looking at Peppa and trying to get her attention. Turning around, Peppa noticed that George was also inside. She went outside. The yard was empty. The grass was pressed down as if someone had just left. But now, in the window, there was her, the one who hadn't come out. Peppa decided to go back home. The door creaked as if someone was pulling it at the same time she did. Something in the house had changed, like it was shrinking. The wardrobe remained, but it no longer hid anything. Peppa entered the kitchen. George sat with his back to her at the table. He was waiting, but something was wrong. His face was blurred. He whispered, "You lose. The game was over." But had it ever really begun? Mummy Pig always told Peppa, "Don't play with your food." But tonight in the pitch-black kitchen, Peppa is playing. George draws with chalk. "This is my friend," he whispers, pointing at the corner. But the room is empty, except for the horned shadow behind him. The bedroom light flickers. Peppa pretends to sleep. Outside the door, Daddy. But the silhouette is all wrong. Too tall, too thin. And why is there a knife gleaming in his hand? The postman stands facing the wall. In his hands, a letter. The envelope is damp. The words, "Do not open," glisten. But Peppa's hoof is already reaching for it. The TV in the living room buzzes with static. The reflection of Peppa walks toward it. But Peppa is asleep upstairs. Then the lights cut out. Silence. And their voices overlapping. "You're one of us now." Daddy Pig, Peppa, and George decided to go for a walk by the pond. When they reached the bend, the path to the pond was blocked. A sign read, "Passage closed." But nearby, there was another sign pointing toward the forest. Daddy Pig noticed a fallen signpost. He picked it up and said,
Probably this way.
A narrow trail led into a sparse forest. The further they went, the quieter everything around became. No wind, no birds, only footsteps. Suddenly, a duck appeared. Daddy Pig suggested following her as she might lead them to the pond. Peppa was wary of the duck's behavior. She seemed strange. The duck started moving chaotically, but no one except Peppa paid attention to it. It seemed like they were walking in circles. Same sign, same turn, but not the same place. George looked into a puddle and saw himself, but his reflection was going backwards. Finally, the pond, but it didn't ring with duck calls or splash like usual. It was waiting. The water was smooth, dark, unnaturally black. At first, one duck appeared, then two. Their eyes were red. Suddenly, the ducks grew into huge, toothy monsters and roared wildly as they swallowed George and Daddy Pig. Peppa stepped back, but she lost her footing and disappeared into the darkness of the ominous pond. She was falling, but not downwards, through images like through cracks in glass. Something was waiting for her below. Suddenly, all became normal again, but she didn't say a word. They returned home. Everything looked normal, almost. Peppa was standing at the window. She looked like Peppa, but only on the outside. Peppa and Susie decided to go to the beach. The clouds were gathering. Waves roared with gloomy thunder, and the wind howled. The girls began building sandcastles. Suddenly, they noticed a dark whirlpool in the water, pulling everything around it. Suddenly, the water monster emerged from the water, sinister with shiny scales and creepy, empty eyes. "I've been waiting for you," he said. "I guard this abyss and take everyone to the bottom. This abyss has swallowed many. It takes those who are not afraid of their fears. If you want to learn its secret, you need to throw something precious to you into this abyss." Susie threw her favorite toy into the whirlpool. The water in the abyss splashed and terrifying faces of lost souls appeared on the surface. Peppa threw her favorite ball, and at that moment, the whirlpool boiled over, swallowing her soul. "You have become part of me. Now you will stay in this abyss forever." Their souls were pulled into watery silence. When they opened their eyes, they found themselves on the dark seabed. They noticed two red eyes watching them from the darkness. Suddenly, a terrifying sea duck jumped out, sharp-toothed and enormous. Peppa thought it looked familiar. The duck transformed into an even more horrifying silhouette that chased them across the seabed. The girls tried to swim faster, but their strength was fading. Suddenly, they spotted a small cave and quickly hid inside. The duck swam past. They caught their breath, but then light appeared behind them again. This time, two green eyes. With a wild scream, they jumped out of the cave. Behind them emerged a huge sea dragon with sharp teeth, long whiskers, and enormous claws. It wrapped its tentacles around them and dragged them into its cave. No one ever saw them again.